Welcome back to Eject Media, where dusty VHS tapes hold forgotten stories, strange visions, and the kind of movies you can't quite find anywhere else. Today we're heading into the darker side of Australian horror and thrillers from the late 70s and early 80s, a period when filmmakers weren't afraid to get weird, unsettling, and often downright grotesque. These aren't your typical hits or box office favorites. These are the tapes with lurid artwork, obscure titles, and stories that might confuse you on first viewing, but linger in your mind long after the credits roll. From surreal psychological tales to body horror spectacles, from relentless killers to monstrous predators, these films pushed fear into bold, unusual directions. So dim the lights, cue the static hum of your CRT, and settle in. Tonight we're exploring 10 obscure Australian horror and thriller films that slipped under the radar but still leave a lasting, unforgettable mark. Next of Kin, 1982. Some homes carry history. Montclair carries something far heavier. In Tony Williams's 1982 film Next of Kin, the sprawling retirement estate becomes more than just a setting. It's a labyrinth of secrets, dread, and slow-burning terror. The story follows Linda Stevens, played by Jackie Caron, who inherits Montclair after the death of her mother and aunt. On the surface, it seems like a chance to settle into a quiet role as caretaker. But almost immediately, the house pushes back. Strange noises echo in the halls, lights flicker without reason, and scraps of an old diary suggest that Montclair's past hides something sinister. As Linda digs deeper, her sense of reality begins to fray. Is she uncovering family secrets, or is the house itself playing tricks? The line between psychological and supernatural horror blurs, leaving both her and the audience unsure of what to trust. Williams paces the film with patience, letting unease build gradually instead of rushing toward shocks. Gary Hanson's cinematography lingers on shadowy hallways and empty rooms, while Klaus Schultz's eerie electronic score seeps into every frame, keeping tension alive even in silence. By the time Linda uncovers the truth, Montclair feels less like a building and more like a living presence. Something that watches, remembers, and resists. The revelations are unsettling not just for their horror, but for what they say about family, legacy, and the weight of the past. Often described as a hidden gem of Australian horror, Next of Kin has earned its reputation for atmosphere and restraint. It doesn't overwhelm with spectacle, it unsettles with suggestion. And that slow, creeping dread is what lingers long after the credits roll. Patrick, 1978. For 3 years, Patrick has lain motionless in a hospital bed. Eyes open, body unresponsive, seemingly locked away from the world. To most, he looks like a harmless coma patient. But in Richard Franklin's 1978 film, Patrick, that silence hides something terrifying. An active, calculating mind with psychokinetic powers. Assigned to his care is nurse Kathy Jacquard, played by Susan Penhaligon. At first, she treats Patrick as any other long-term patient. But strange events begin to ripple through the clinic. Equipment behaving oddly, people injured in bizarre accidents, and a creeping sense that Patrick is aware of everything around him. When he begins to communicate through a typewriter, it becomes clear he's not only conscious, but also obsessed, fixated on Kathy in ways that quickly turn dangerous. What sets the film apart is its restraint. Instead of leaning on gore or jump scares, Patrick builds its tension slowly through atmosphere and psychology. The sterile hallways of the Roget Clinic become unsettling, every silence stretching a little too long, every glance from Patrick's wide, unblinking eyes carrying a threat. His powers make him terrifying, not because they're loud or flashy, but because they're invisible, subtle intrusions into the lives of those around him. There's also an ethical edge to the story. How do you care for someone who can control you without moving a muscle? Where does compassion end and self-preservation begin? That blend of suspense, moral unease, and Hitchcock-inspired pacing is what's given Patrick its lasting cult reputation. By the end, it's not just a story about a man in a coma. It's a story about obsession, control, and the frightening possibility that even the most helpless figure might be the most dangerous one of all. Dark Age, 1987. The Australian outback is a place of extremes. Blazing heat, endless plains, winding rivers, and a wilderness that's as beautiful as it is unforgiving. It's here that Arch Nicholson's 1987 film Dark Age unfolds, blending suspense, creature thrills, and cultural tension into something more than just another killer crocodile movie. At the center is Steve Harris, a park ranger and herpetologist played by John Jarrett. His assignment seems straightforward: track down and stop a giant saltwater crocodile named Numenwari, blamed for a string of attacks. But this isn't just an ordinary predator. To the local Aboriginal community, Numenwari is sacred, a living vessel for ancestral spirits. For Harris, the mission quickly shifts from a matter of public safety into a moral crossroads. Does he protect people by killing the crocodile, or honor the traditions that demand its survival? That conflict deepens with the arrival of poachers like John Besser, who view Numenwari only as a payday. Harris is pulled between competing forces: opportunists seeking profit, communities fighting for respect, and the primal reality of nature itself. All the while, the crocodile remains an imposing and unpredictable presence, less a monster than a reminder of humanity's fragility in the wild. What makes Dark Age stand out is its atmosphere. The Australian outback isn't just a backdrop, it's a character in itself, shaping every moment with isolation and tension. Nicholson lingers on quiet stretches of land and water, ratcheting up suspense before releasing it in bursts of sudden violence. The crocodile effects are effective, but it's the pacing and mood that keep the danger looming. Beyond the thrills, the film weaves in themes of cultural respect, environmental responsibility, and the uneasy balance between progress and tradition. It may not have been a mainstream hit, but over time Dark Age has earned a reputation as one of the more thoughtful entries in the creature feature genre. By the end, it's not just a story of man against beast. It's a reflection on how we choose to live alongside nature, and the cost when that balance is broken. Body Melt, 1993. On Pebbles Court, a quiet cul-de-sac in Melbourne, life looks perfectly ordinary. The lawns are trimmed, the neighbors are friendly, and everyone seems to glow with good health. But all that clean living hides something far darker beneath the surface. Body Melt, directed by Philip Brophy in 1993, takes suburban normalcy and tears it apart through a nightmare vision of wellness culture pushed to the extreme. At the center of it all is Vimuville, a local health retreat promoting a brand new miracle supplement. Marketed as the ultimate boost for strength, beauty, and longevity, it quickly reveals itself as something much more disturbing. The first victims show just how wrong things can go. Cheryl Rand, a pregnant woman, undergoes horrifying changes as her body mutates in grotesque and unpredictable ways. From there, the nightmare spreads through the neighborhood. Each household on Pebbles Court experiences its own gruesome downfall: explosive deaths, warped transformations, and moments so outrageous they drift into pitch-black comedy. What makes the film stand out is its relentless practical effects. Bob Karen's makeup and creature work are shocking, graphic, and often so over the top they feel surreal. One moment you're wincing, the next you're laughing nervously at the sheer absurdity of it all. But Body Melt isn't just splatter for the sake of splatter. Underneath the gore is a sharp satire about society's obsession with health fads and miracle cures. It skewers the blind trust we place in products promising eternal youth or impossible fitness, showing just how dangerous that chase for perfection can become. Over time, this blend of satire, comedy, and unflinching body horror has earned the movie a strong cult following. It's the kind of film that shocks, disgusts, and amuses in equal measure, leaving you unsettled long after it ends. Body Melt doesn't just gross you out, it forces you to think about the cost of obsession, and it does it with a wicked grin. Lady Stay Dead, 1981. Set against the bright, deceptively calm backdrop of Sydney's suburbs, Lady Stay Dead is anything but sunny. Directed by Terry Bork in 1981, it takes the slasher formula and twists it into something more intimate and unsettling, a slow burn of obsession and violence. At the center is Gordon Mason, a handyman whose quiet, awkward demeanor masks a far darker side. He works at the Rocky Beach Motel, where his infatuation with his employer Marie begins to spiral. When Marie resists his advances, the situation turns horrific, leading to a brutal assault and her death. But the horror doesn't end there. Soon after, Marie's sister Jenny arrives, completely unaware of what has happened. She moves into the same home, at first enjoying its quiet charm, until she starts noticing strange details, small disruptions, unnerving behaviors, things that don't add up. Piece by piece, she begins to sense that she's living alongside a predator. Unlike many slashers of its era, Lady Stay Dead doesn't rely on constant bloodshed to scare its audience. Instead, it thrives on atmosphere and creeping dread. Empty corridors, subtle shadows, and the sense of being watched create a mood of paranoia. The performances keep the story grounded, making the violence feel disturbingly real rather than cartoonish. The pacing is deliberate, forcing viewers to sit in the tension as it builds. By the time the danger becomes unavoidable, the suspense is almost unbearable. What makes the film memorable isn't just the violence itself, but the way it captures obsession and the fragility of safety in familiar spaces. Behind the sunny facade of suburbia lies a nightmare, one that lingers long after the final scene. Lady Stay Dead may not be as well known as other horror titles of the early 80s, but it remains an unnerving reminder that true terror often comes from the people we least expect. Thirst, 1979. In the sweltering Australian outback, thirst isn't just uncomfortable. It can be deadly. Rod Hardy's 1979 film Thirst takes that simple reality and twists it into a tense, psychological horror, where the environment is as much an enemy as the people around you. The story centers on Christine, a young woman trapped in a small town suffering through a crippling drought. As water becomes scarce, the town's fragile social order begins to collapse. Fear, desperation, and selfishness take hold, and every interaction carries the potential for violence. Christine must navigate this escalating chaos while trying to survive and protect those who rely on her. Hardy uses the harsh landscape to maximum effect. Sun-baked streets, cracked earth, and the oppressive heat make every scene feel stifling, trapping both characters and audience in a suffocating atmosphere. Suspense builds not through cheap scares, but through tension and uncertainty. Who can be trusted? And how far will anyone go when survival is on the line? The film also serves as a cautionary tale about human nature under pressure. Isolation and scarcity strip away civility, revealing how fear and desperation can transform ordinary people into threats. Christine's struggle becomes as much about maintaining her morality as it is about staying alive. By the time the climax arrives, it's clear that the real horror isn't the drought itself. It's what it does to those trapped within it. Thirst remains a compelling example of Australian horror, combining environmental menace with character-driven suspense to create a story that's both thrilling and deeply unsettling. Dead End Drive-In, 1986. A night at the movies is supposed to be simple. Buy a ticket, watch a film, and head home. But in Dead End Drive-In, Brian Trenchard Smith takes that familiar setting and flips it into something nightmarish. Jimmy and his girlfriend Carmen head to their local drive-in, expecting just another evening out. Instead, their car breaks down, and they discover the place isn't really a theater at all. It's a cleverly disguised detention camp. The government has turned the drive-in into a holding pen for anyone they consider disposable. Restless teens, outcasts, people who don't fit neatly into society's system. Once you're in, there's no getting out. The gates are locked, and the distractions are endless. Fast food, pounding music, constant movie reels, all designed to keep the inmates docile. Most of the trapped youth give in, content to waste away in this neon-colored purgatory. Jimmy, though, refuses to accept it. Where others see comfort, he sees control, and his fight to escape becomes a rebellion against more than just fences and guards. It's a rebellion against complacency itself. The film thrives on its punk-inspired visuals and gritty atmosphere. Rusted cars, spray-painted walls, and synth-driven chaos create a world that feels both absurd and disturbingly believable. At its heart, Dead End Drive-In is as much satire as action. It digs into consumerism, class division, and the way entertainment can be used to pacify rather than inspire. Over the years, it's earned cult status for exactly that mix of style and commentary. Beneath the explosions and car chases, there's a sharp edge, a warning about how easily people can be lulled into submission when comfort is offered as a substitute for freedom. Strange, stylish, and defiantly 80s, Dead End Drive-In is more than a dystopian thriller. It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest prison doesn't need bars, just distractions. The Survivor, 1981. Some disasters end in fire and wreckage. Others live on in the minds of those who walk away. In David Hemmings's 1981 film, The Survivor, tragedy is only the starting point, as survival becomes a curse, steeped in mystery, guilt, and the supernatural. The story follows Ken, the lone survivor of a devastating plane crash that claims his wife and many others. Emerging from the wreckage alive should feel miraculous, but for Ken, it sparks a spiral of visions and unexplainable events. He begins to see shadows where none should exist, hear voices in empty rooms, and witness objects appear and vanish, as if reality itself is slipping out of his grasp. Is he being haunted by the spirits of those who died, or is his own guilt rewriting the world around him? That uncertainty drives the film's tension, trapping both Ken and the audience in a haze where grief, trauma, and the possibility of the supernatural bleed together. Hemmings leans on atmosphere rather than spectacle. Interiors are cloaked in oppressive shadows. Light flickers unnervingly, and every sound carries the suggestion of something lurking just beyond view. The pacing is deliberate, letting unease seep in gradually until even stillness feels threatening. As Ken encounters others who may or may not share his visions, the line between external haunting and internal collapse becomes impossible to define. By the climax, it's clear that the real horror isn't just the crash itself, but the weight of survival and the torment it brings. The Survivor stands out as a psychological ghost story where the terror is as much in the mind as in the world beyond. It's haunting not for what it shows outright, but for the uncertainty it leaves behind, lingering long after the screen fades to black. Harlequin, 1980. In Harlequin, Simon Winsor's 1980 supernatural thriller, the ordinary and the extraordinary collide in unsettling ways. It begins with a child's birthday party, innocent enough, until a stranger named Gregory Wolfe arrives and seemingly cures the boy's terminal illness. From that moment on, Wolfe, played with magnetic intensity by Robert Powell, becomes a figure impossible to ignore. Wolfe isn't just a healer. He's enigmatic, charismatic, and deeply unsettling, a man who slips seamlessly into the lives of Senator Nick Rast and his wife Sandra. At first they welcome him, even rely on him. But the more influence he gains, the more uneasy those around him become. Doc Whelan, a calculating political kingmaker, sees Wolfe as dangerous, not just to the balance of power, but to the very control he's built over the senator's career. What unfolds is less about miracles and more about manipulation, faith, and the way influence spreads when wrapped in mystery. Wolfe's role in the story clearly echoes Rasputin, the mystic who captivated and destabilized Russian royalty. Like Rasputin, Wolfe straddles the line between savior and menace, his motives impossible to pin down. The film leans heavily on atmosphere. Cinematography drenches scenes in unease, and Brian May's score reinforces the sense that something unnatural is always lurking just beneath the surface. Rather than relying on shocks or spectacle, Harlequin draws tension from power struggles, political, personal, and spiritual. Though critics at the time weren't sure what to make of its mix of supernatural mysticism and political drama, the film has since found its audience. Today it's admired for being bold, strange, and unwilling to fit neatly into one genre. By the end, Harlequin leaves its central question unresolved. Is Gregory Wolfe a miracle worker, a manipulator, or something in between? That ambiguity makes the film not just a thriller, but a haunting meditation on how power, real or imagined, can reshape the world around it. Razorback, 1984. The Australian outback is a place where everything can kill you. Heat, thirst, isolation. In Russell Mulcahy's 1984 film Razorback, that danger takes monstrous form in the shape of a giant wild boar, a predator so ferocious it feels less like an animal and more like a nightmare dragged into reality. The story begins with Jake Cullen, a farmer whose life is shattered when his grandson is snatched away by the beast. Accused of murder and left without justice, Jake dedicates himself to hunting the creature, driven by grief and obsession. Years later, journalist Beth Winters arrives to report on kangaroo hunting, but finds herself caught in the crossfire between violent locals and the Razorback itself. When she disappears, her husband Carl travels from America in search of answers. What he finds is a land that doesn't forgive weakness, and a creature that doesn't stop once it has the scent of blood. Carl joins forces with Jake and a scientist named Sarah, and together they face not just the Razorback, but the brutal reality of survival in the outback. Mulcahy transforms the landscape into something mythic. Sweeping shots of empty plains, jagged cliffs, and burning skies make every encounter with the beast feel inevitable, like nature itself is conspiring against the characters. The Razorback isn't just a monster. It's an embodiment of the wild, unstoppable, and indifferent to human suffering. Though critics were divided on its release, Razorback has grown into a cult favorite. Its mix of stylized visuals, relentless suspense, and raw creature feature thrills make it stand out in the horror genre. By the end, the message is clear. In the outback, man is never at the top of the food chain. And when nature decides to strike back, survival becomes the only story worth telling. That wraps up our look at 10 strange, intense, and often wonderfully inventive Australian horror and thriller films from the late 70s and 80s. Some will make you flinch, some will make you laugh at their audacity, and some are just unlike anything else you've seen. But that's exactly what makes them memorable. These films may have been overlooked when they first came out, but they've found a lasting home with fans who love the weird, the wild, and the wonderfully offbeat corners of cinema. If you enjoyed this dive into forgotten VHS treasures, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share which title stuck with you the most. And if you want to dig even deeper into VHS history, check out our online store at ejectmedia.etsy.com. Remember, be kind, rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.